Good morning everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Now I'm doing the voiceover running on from the previous one, so this is all going to look pretty familiar, but the video is from a different day. So what we're doing is the food prep from and meal prep, freezer, preserving and everything else from a 6-week grocery haul for anyone who's tuning in for this particular video. So I only shop every 6 weeks, and then I like to share the videos in between those 6 weeks of how we use all the food and the tasks that we do. Now today's video is about canning black beans predominantly. So we have decided to try adding a few different things into our diet that we haven't used before, all about the diversity of it. None of us have any issues with blood sugars or anything else. We can eat carbs, we don't have a problem with it. We can eat proteins. We don't eat dairy. Generally speaking, I do, but the rest of the family doesn't, because 5 of the 6 kids have had issues with dairy in the past, and so has my husband. It is possible that they've grown out of a lot of it, but testing the theory is really an unpleasant thing. So we just continue on the path that we're continuing on, making sure that they get all the nutrients that they need that they would normally get from dairy in other ways. So generally speaking, our food is quite diverse because we can, is basically the thing. But we have never really used beans very much. We've made baked beans, and I canned baked beans recently that everyone really enjoyed, but we've never used much in the way of other beans. And I think that's from my upbringing. When I was a kid, my grandmother didn't use beans. We used soup mixes, lentils and pearl barleys and things like that, which is what I tend to reach for, but we didn't use anything in the way of beans. We had tin baked beans, but that was sort of it. So I think part of the lack of beans is just that it wasn't something familiar to me, and so I'm trying to introduce some of those things for a bit more diversity in our meals, but also because beans are nice and easy to store. They're cheaper than meat, and they can be a meat replacement in some things, but also just because it's fun to have different choices. That's the main thing, is that it's fun to have different choices. Now Darryl really likes the burritos that you can get from like Guzman y Gomez and things like that, with the black rice and the black beans and stuff, so we're going to attempt to replicate that at some point. But for the moment, it was just about buying some dry beans, figuring out how I wanted to can them, and then we're going to use them in a myriad of ways to see how we like them. So that's predominantly what this video is about, is canning those black beans, and the method that I chose after doing all the different research. There is a lot of different ways of canning black beans out there. This is how I chose to do it, so I thought I'd bring you along and show you how I did it and the results of doing it and things like that, and whether we were happy with the process in the end and that sort of thing. There's a couple of other bits and pieces in this video as well, as there always is in my videos. I'm not very good at sticking to a single subject, which is why I don't do very well in the search algorithm, mind you. But the black beans are the main focus of this particular video, so feel free to skip through anything you want to get to places. I'm pretty slack with getting chapters or timestamps in anywhere. I just don't really have the time, but I think eventually it might be a job I'll hire one of the kids for. They can go back through all the videos and put all the timestamps in, and then I can pay them accordingly for whatever they want, whether, you know, Xbox Game Pass, Minecraft, Minecoins, whatever, that sort of thing. So enjoy watching, and I'll see you at the end. So before I could get to the beans, we have pork that we buy a case of rolled pork legs with rind on from Costco every 6 weeks, and there's 3 of those in there, and we use those 3 porks in a variety of ways. We like to make sausages with them sometimes. We didn't do sausages this month, we just didn't. It's a time consuming sort of a task. I didn't get around to it. I definitely need to do it next month though, because I really enjoy having the sausages frozen in the freezer. You can pull them out, have mash and veg and gravy, and you've got a meal. Like, it's a really them and meatballs. We didn't do meatballs this month either, and they're another one that I freeze in bulk, and you can just pull them out with mash and veg and meal, mash, veg, gravy, and you've got a really tasty meal. So need to do that again this month too. But we had one of the porks to do. Darryl had cut the rind off and cooked it over potatoes the day before, I think it was, so we just had the meat left. So I cut half of it off to use as a smoked pork roast, and we put that in the smoker. I haven't shown it here, I've shown it a few times. We do a Dijon mustard rub, then a sweet smoky dry rub over the top of the mustard, stick it in the smoker and cook it until it is an internal temperature of 62 Celsius, which I think is 145 Fahrenheit, and then rest it in foil, and then we slice it up to eat as sliced roast. So we did that with half of it, and then the other half I cut up to use in jars. So we like to can the pork. It's a fairly lean pork, but it still works perfectly well. You just cut it up into largish chunks. You want a little bit of fat with it, but not too much, and push it into the jars. You want to pack those jars really nice and tight because the meat will shrink. It'll create its own juices, so we don't add any juice. Sometimes I add a little bit of bacon or some flavorings, or sometimes I just add a teaspoon of salt to them. And then I just pack them all in the jars, put the lids on them, and I can them as is. So standard methods, I use size 31s in Fowler's for Cola jars here, and I just pack the pork in there, put a bit of salt. I do the normal, clean the rims with vinegar, rings go on, rings get cleaned, lids go on, clips go on, and these are equivalent enough to a quart that I process them for 90 minutes like a quart. And then they go into the canner, 90 minutes as I said, and they're done for the shelf. We use these for anything that you want to use pulled pork for. It is not particularly seasoned, though you can season it. We haven't as yet, but I think we need to try seasoning some before we put it in there. But you can season it. We don't, generally speaking, we season it when we have it. We'll have it with the plum barbecue sauce, or we'll put seasoning on it when we heat it up, and it can be used for a variety of things. There's actually, I've used it a couple of times, I think, in the What We Eat in a Week that'll be coming up shortly, so you'll see it there. So I also had to soak the black beans. So that's why we've got the pork in here, because I was doing the pork that day, but I also have to soak the black beans the day before I'm using it. So this day is when I soaked the black beans. So I had 2 bags of them. All I did was pour them into a container each and fill the container with water. You want plenty of water because the beans will double in size. So you want enough water that they will still stay under that water by that point in time. And you can use whatever you want to do them in. I'm using plastic containers, the Kmart faux Tupperware containers, because they were a good size and they were what I had access to. I could have soaked them in jars. I would have needed multiple jars. It was easier for me to do it in this container. And I have no idea how much I need. So that was still part of this process as well, was figuring that out. This is what the pork jars look like when they come out of the canner. So as you can see, the meat sort of shrinks in. It creates all this juice around it. You get a bit of a fat cap, and you just end up with these chunks of shredded pork, basically. We love having these on the shelf. They are so handy. You can put them in soups. You can put them in just fried up and have it on flatbreads. You can have it in pasta dishes. You can have it in any way you want. It is just unseasoned pulled pork, basically. Not as fatty as like if you're pulling a pork butt, which has that nice texture of fat on it. These are a lot leaner, so you don't generally eat it as is, but it works perfectly on pizza toppings, on nachos, in many ways. It's a really nice thing to have on the shelf, and because these porks are only $6.99 a kilo, it is definitely a cheap meat to put on the shelf too. This is what the pork roast looks like when it comes out of the smoker. I don't have much footage of this, as I said. I was soaking the black beans, so I have a bit of footage this day because I was soaking the black beans, but I thought I'd share it anyway. So this is what the smoked pork looks like. I do have this shown in a few other videos. It's one of our favourite ways to eat this pork, but we will eat most of that piece of pork in 1 to 2 meals. So it's not an efficient way to use the pork, but we enjoy it regardless. So the next day we're going to fill the jars with the beans. When I first went out and checked the beans, they were about 1.5 times their size in the water, but then I got sidetracked and had other things that needed to be done. So when I came out again, by the time I came out again, it was quite late in the day, and they were about double, and so they had been in there for about 28 hours, which is fine, but it just meant that they were double the size. Now the idea of soaking the beans is that you're removing some of the chemical or the compound that your body doesn't digest properly, which causes the gas. So you're degassing the beans is the theory. So when I did some research about it, it's something to do with the compound in the beans when it's going through your digestive system. If it isn't already started breaking down, then your body can't break it down in the intestines, so it breaks it down in the bowels, which means that it causes gas. Whereas if you soak them, then it started breaking down the compounds already so that your intestines have the ability to break it down and process it properly before it hits your bowels. That's a really simplified what I saw, read and interpreted, but that's the theory. So I like the idea of soaking them, and it worked really well with the baked beans. So we soaked them for about that 24 hours, and they were about double the size at that point. The other benefit of soaking them is that you're going to see approximately how much it's going to take up in your jars rather than putting them in dry. So some people just put in half a cup of dry beans per quart or whatever the ratios are. I looked at a bunch, but I didn't didn't do that. So you can put like half a cup of dry beans in the jar, fill it up with water and process it, and it ends up being the correct quantity. I'm not overly comfortable with that idea, partly because I like the idea of soaking my beans, but also because I don't have enough experience to know how much those beans grow or don't. Sutton's Days did a video where she did a whole bunch of different beans to show how much each one swelled in soaking and stuff like that, but yeah, I just wanted to get it done, so I wanted to do it in a way that I felt more comfortable. So by soaking these and them ending up double their size, which is basically as big as they will get, I could fill these jars about 2/3 full and know that there would be enough room in the jars, and then top it up with water. Some people fill their jars more with beans or less. When I was reading, I liked the idea that by having more liquid in there, it meant that you weren't going to mush the beans up when you were getting them out. Sometimes you want to mush the beans up, but it's nice to have that choice to either pull them out somewhat whole or pull them out sort of mushed up. So I did 2/3, topped it up with water. I found some ball lids in a box that I hadn't used. I didn't realize. So I'm using the Ball Mason quart jars here, and I did all the normal: clean the rims with vinegar, put the lids on, and then your rings go on fingertip tight, and then we're going to process them. So you can add flavor to your beans in the jars as well. I added a little bit of salt, but you can add other flavors as well. I found lots of different options there, but I just hadn't. I don't know beans well enough to make that decision. So this was going to be a very plain, standard bean canning. The other thing is that balls, like the standards for canning beans, are that I would have soaked them. I would have, of course, I don't think I mentioned, when I soaked them, I tipped that water out, rinsed them before filling the jars with the beans. So in the methods, the approved methods for canning beans, though, you would drain them, rinse them, and then you would put them in a pot of boiling and boil them for another 30 minutes before putting them into your jars. That's the approved method for canning beans. I really didn't want that extra step. Partly it's laziness. I didn't want to have to do that extra step, but partly it's just that it seemed overkill. To be honest, it just seemed unnecessary. When if you're pressure canning beans, 90 minutes is plenty of time to pressure can beans. I think you only pressure can them for 60 minutes, actually. So you're going to be pressure canning the beans for 90 minutes in a jar. If I boil them for 30 minutes first, then yeah, so I chose not to do that, but the approved method for canning beans, you would boil them for 30 minutes and then fill the jars with the beans and the cooking liquid before processing them. That's, disclaimer there. I chose not to after doing my own research, having a look at a whole bunch of different ways that people can them and everything else, and can them just after soaking them, filled it up with water, put them in the canner. 90 minutes for a quart size, 75 minutes for a pint. I'll double check that and I'll fix that on the screen if I've gotten that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. And in the pressure canner, obviously beans need to be pressure canned. So they went into the pressure canner, 3 quarts of water in the bottom as per usual, using the canner, put the jars in, and I run a weight at 15 pounds of pressure for my altitude, 90 minutes. I experimented with cooking the rest of the soaked beans, which is a good comparison for when I use the canned ones, because I don't really know what the difference is, so I wanted to have that comparison. I very simply put them in the Dutch oven with onion, garlic and salt and simmered them until they were cooked. That was it. We used them in a bunch of different ways over the next couple of days. I don't appear to have any film from the 30th or the 31st. I must have just been a bit over it. But we used it in various ways. Darryl did a lot of the cooking at that point. We had some ground pork that we had done from the other part of the leg that we'd seasoned and ground, and then not got around to doing sausages with, so we cooked it off. So we had a bunch of ground pork that we mixed the beans with some sour cream and salsa, and we tried it in a few different ways. There's at least one in the What We Eat in a Week as well that I'll show you as well, but we used it in a bunch of different ways, and to try out this cooked beans rather than the canned one, so that we'd have a comparison to compare them, to understand the difference between it, and whether we would prefer to just cook it on the day, or whether the canning it is a good way for us. So this is what the beans look like out of the canner. Now, there's been quite a significant amount of siphoning, and there's definitely bean juice or whatever you want to call it in the bottom of the canner. There's a discoloration in the bottom of the canner. I think I took them up to pressure too quickly. So when you're pressure canning something, if you take them up to pressure too quickly, you can cause siphoning in your jars. And I think that's what I did. It ended up being like 4 o'clock in the afternoon by the time I got this done. And I was just tired and just wanted it done. So I'm pretty sure I just took the canner up too fast, to be honest. There was plenty of headspace and everything else. Pretty sure it was user error here. They're still covered in liquid and the jars are still 2/3 full, so they're still safe to put on the shelf. We will tend to use these ones as a priority though, because they're not perfectly canned. But they all sealed. They all sealed and they all looked fine. They all had enough liquid in them that I was okay with it. I show this in more detail in the What We Eat in a Week, but one of the meals that we tried the jars with, so I wanted to show you how the jars looked in the end of it. One of the meals we tried was with like a Spanish/Mexican red rice. It seems to have a bunch of different origins. I don't know which one is the specific one that I was doing. There was a bunch of different recipes around and I just followed a few steps that I saw that seemed to work. So we made a red rice with corn and black beans as lunch of that day. I wanted to show the texture of them coming out of the jars. I didn't really drain them because as these jars had siphoned, the liquid was quite gelatinous and there wasn't really liquid to drain. The texture was great. Everyone enjoyed the meal. So, onwards and upwards with finding ways to use these, and the beans held themselves together really well. So we didn't find a difference between the cooked on the stove and the canned ones. They both had a really nice texture. They both held together well. They both tasted nice. So I think canning them's the way to go because it makes it easier for us to make a meal on spur of the moment, which is part of why we have the canned goods, is so that if I couldn't be bothered, if I need someone else to make it, or if I just haven't sorted anything out, like how easy is it to put some rice on and beans and a bit of meat or corn or veggies or whatever and have a side. Like, I know that this red rice and beans is supposed to be a side to something, but we just had it as is at this particular time. But just another easy thing to grab off the shelf and be able to use, especially in busy parts of the year. So we are very happy with how the black beans turned out and everybody enjoyed it. So that was really good, and that means that now we have something else to buy inexpensively and keep on our shelves, which was the whole point of giving it a go. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.